sent you so people can
Thank you.
we are live. Thank you.
Fantastic. Welcome. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Alexis. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. How are you going?
I am feeling a bit tender and a bit sad actually today, which is part of the reason for our topic of grief and what it is and how to understand it and how to approach it.
Yeah.
Because my beloved, I've had 2 or 3 really powerful teachers in my adult life, and probably my most special teacher that I've ever had and mentor passed away in the early hours of this morning. So when I woke up this morning, I checked my phone and I had a text message from one of my friends who's also involved in the NVC community that I've been part of for many years. And his text message informed me that our beloved teacher, Robert Gonzalez, had died overnight. And I not immediately, but very quickly burst into tears. And I've been feeling gratitude, sadness, appreciation, and grief all day.
Yes.
Going into this topic in a very direct way.
Yeah, so you'll be sharing experientially, which is such a powerful way to teach, Rachel. And I'm really honoured that you've showed up with this topic that you're experiencing and processing. So we can actually be really learning directly from your sensory experience.
And from yours too, Alexis, you work with the body of people who I'm sure are still holding grief of some kind or another.
Absolutely. Grief is prevalent. And in the preparation for this topic today, I did also touch a little on the collective grief. And this is something that at least is very apparent in Australia in our reconciliation with Indigenous cultures. It's just one manifestation of our collective grief that remains still for most and collectively unresolved. So we will talk a little bit today about the 5 stages of grief, just to see the many different ways that it manifests, often unsurprising ways. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to facilitate our own grieving process, which is so essential and very much in fitting with the themes that we've been sharing around compassionate embracing, the window of tolerance, finding your center, and allowing the free flow of sensory experience through emotion. And then we'll also touch a little bit on what happens if we don't allow grief, and how that can remain in the body, and therefore the value of such things as crying, that you posted that beautiful article about, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that. Even the biochemistry of tears is quite a stunning mechanism. So that's what we're planning to touch on today. And I believe you have a quote to bring to mind.
Well, the quote that I wanted to share, actually, I wouldn't mind you reading that, Alexis.
Yeah, thank you. You did send it. Thanks, Tom.
And I sent it, but while you're looking for it, can I share one interesting anecdote with you?
Yeah.
About how the body keeps the score.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of context. Growing up as a child, I had a lot of trouble swallowing tablets.
Oh, yeah.
If I ever had to swallow like an antibiotic tablet or something, and even to this day, there's something in me that resists swallowing tablets a little bit. Although when I'm feeling very empowered and strong in myself, I swallow those tablets with no problem. But this morning, when I was feeling this deep grief, which I'm still feeling now, I went to swallow my supplements, my vitamin tablets and fish oil and whatever, and I could barely swallow them. And I thought that was a really interesting change in my body. And I immediately thought, it's almost like I can't swallow the news of what's of what I've just learned. And on days where I feel really energized and vitalized, it's like I can swallow anything life has to give me, bring it on. But this morning, that that resistance came back just to the act of swallowing, which I thought was really interesting.
The throat is a highly sensitive organ, and it's, you know, the early stage of our digestion, the esophagus. And you know, we often talk about the ability to digest or metabolize emotion, and my experience is very much there's a downwardness to that processing. You know, in contrast to the kind of resistance, the more we can let that down, the more we come to terms with, we make sense of, and we can let go of eventually, just as we do with digestion. So that's such a beautiful, recognition. The throat is letting you know what's, you know.
Just where it just sort of was letting me know where I was at, that, you know, like I'm still, this is hard to digest. It was very unconscious sort of, which the body is, right? It was very interesting.
Just on that, before we move too far away, those of you who've done some yoga, and perhaps you have too, Rachel, the lion's breath is specific for extending. When we extend the tongue out, it brings the connective tissues that are connected to the base of the tongue, that is the throat, it lifts them. And with the exhale, the lion's breath is with the tongue all the way out, the mouth open, and a strong exhale, we can actually open up that constriction. And not that we need to rush it, but you can access even these deep parts of the body that are otherwise seen as inaccessible. Just wanted to mention that.
That's good to know. Yeah. And all while honoring the body's mechanisms, right? Of
so much. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So this gorgeous quote that you've sent me by Frances Ward Weller. Are you ready?
I would love you to read that now. Yes.
The work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them. How much sorrow can I hold? Well, that's how much gratitude I can give. If I carry only grief, I bend towards cynicism and despair. If I have only gratitude, I become saccharine, sweet, and won't develop much compassion for other people's suffering. Grief keeps the heart fluid and soft, which helps make compassion possible. And that's what I heard in our little touch base before this live, is that you've been addressing your grief with softness and tenderness. Is that fair to say, Rach?
Yeah, and I may start crying at any moment in this video.
And that would be absolutely okay. The softness and the tenderness. Yeah, perhaps we could even talk a little bit about that, in case any of our listeners are bringing grief to the conversation and could use some practical support from the get-go.
Yeah.
How would you describe the process of softening and tenderness amidst grief and sorrow?
Well, I mean, as you mentioned at the start, grief has so many manifestations, and our culture is so terrible, can I say, at honoring and understanding and accepting the various types of and sources of our grief. I mean, the grief that I'm in today is the sort of grief that elicits sympathy from other people. You know, someone I love very much has died, and it's a fairly sort of that's what we think of as grief in this culture. Somebody's died. And if anyone here has experienced the death of someone they love very much, they'll know how quickly you can be catapulted, if you're willing and open to some extent, into the other side of love, which is really the same love, which is grief. You know, the Queen said the price. Grief is the price we pay for love. When Princess Diana died, she said, grief is the price we pay But I don't know if that's quite right. I don't know if it's a price. I just think grief is a form of love. I loved this person and now he's gone in physical form. And the grief reminds me, the extent of my grief is the extent of my love, as that quote sort of implies. However, in my work as a psychologist, and actually somebody, when we announced this topic at 10 o'clock this morning, somebody said, is there a link to trauma? Could trauma be, could grief be part of my trauma response? I guess I have lost a lot in the situation that traumatized me. So maybe that's it. And I replied saying, that is exactly it. And this is the kind of grief we don't understand and honor in our culture. The grief of a breakup, which is the loss of perhaps time with the beloved, but also the imagined future. The loss of dreams and the loss of what we'd hoped for is a big type of grief. And for a child, coming into the world wanting so vulnerably and expecting to receive protection, care, and love and encouragement, and then not getting that, and maybe getting quite the opposite of that, maybe getting ignored, neglected, abused, something else, this is also a kind of loss, a very deep loss, a loss of what we deserved and expected and never got is also a kind of a grief.
Yes.
So, there is a lot of grieving to be done as we do our inner work. And in the grieving and in the, as you mentioned, Alexis, in the allowing ourselves to feel, to be stretched, as that quote says, for our capacity to be built to feel, that which is very uncomfortable, perhaps even painful, is releases a vulnerability. Like it literally is an opening and a releasing to our vulnerability. And in our vulnerable state, I think we soften, and that's when we become more like water, more fluid. In our softening, our heart opens. And in our heart opening, we really get in touch with the longing, with the unmet need, or just with the love. And of course, something in us, when it comes to some of these forms of grief I spoke about, something in us often resists the vulnerability coming up. If our experience earlier on in our lives of being vulnerable was not positive, if there wasn't a soft landing for us in our vulnerability, if no one saw us, if there was no one to support us and hold us, then our experience of vulnerability was that it was unbearably painful. And so something in us says, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go back there. And yet somehow we must. Somehow that's what we need to do.
And there's a humanness in the experience of that vulnerability, a humanness. And what I mean by that is a kind of a rawness that enables my feeling. A lot of the articles that I read today in preparation for this spoke a lot about our capacity for grief is also our capacity for joy. So in being open to the very raw feelings, it reminds us of our humanness, our soft fleshiness, our animalness, our basic nature in some way. I wanted to touch a little bit on the 5 stages, as I said earlier, not that it's the be all and end all, but I think it helps us to recognize that grief manifests in so many ways.
Yes.
So Kubler-Ross, who is considered one of the experts in grief and dying, describes grief in 5 stages, and they are denial, which I would also say shock is in there.
Or disbelief, when people say, I can't believe this has happened.
And I would say that is very relevant to trauma as well, that an absence of being in the body to digest, a denial, an absence of embodiment. Anger is the second.
Yes.
Bargaining. So some kind of how did this happen, and could I exchange something for this? Depression and acceptance, the last stage, acceptance. Yeah, that's an interesting one. The bargaining is particularly interesting to me. I can relate to that.
And it strikes me as the cognitive component of grief. You know, the mind is trying to operate in the world because this is a problem-solving machine, which is really great when we have a problem that can be solved. But grief is a predicament, not a problem. You know, it's something I can't solve. And so I often differentiate between a problem and a predicament. A problem probably has a solution, even if it's complicated, but a predicament is something to be lived with and digested and accepted and worked with. But this problem-solving machine between our ears does the bargaining thing. You know, how could I make this better? How can I fix this problem, even though it's not a problem? How, if only I would have done this. We try and edit the past or rewrite the future. It's all that cognitive side of grief, I think. What do you reckon?
Well, it's interesting because there's, you know, there seems to be some value in it. There's certainly a sense of seeking solutions with grief. Like, if only I can just put my finger on it. I'm yet to decide or to understand whether that has value for us, and whether we may come to some kind of answer. I mean, the mind does have that capacity to come up with an answer.
Yes, but an answer based on acceptance of reality is a different thing, right, to the bargaining stage, which is trying to change the reality. Does that relate to what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah, the bargaining phase is fascinating. So you're saying that the answer is acceptance.
Well, I think that the normal phases of grief that are quite common across all cultures that you just read out from Kubler-Ross, I think they're all in service of acceptance. I think we go through these and between these different stages towards acceptance. I think a true acceptance is, you know, is a place we find ourselves once we've gone through the long, dark night of the soul and given up hope for a different past. You know, it's very, anger keeps us stuck in a bit of a victim mindset, which is very human, of course, you know, blame, anger, you know, and I think bargaining keeps us there. Like, it's a bit of self-blame. If only I would have done this, or I should have, should. And once we give up hope that any of these other strategies are going to change the reality, we finally start to experience acceptance and peace. But we can't do that in the click of a finger. It's a process.
Yes, that's interesting. It sounds like a lot of what we're talking about is grieving for unmet needs.
Yeah. We're getting a lot of comments through Alexis. Maybe.
Great. Yeah, wonderful. Let's check it out.
Can you see the comments from your side?
I can, thank you. Just take me a moment to pull it up.
I must say, though, I mean, this is a fairly pure grief that I'm in today with if you've just tuned in, with the loss of my most special teacher and mentor of my adult life so far, Robert Gonzalez, who's got a beautiful book called Reflections on Living Compassion, if you want to look it up, and his website is livingcompassion.org, and I'm going to get teary even as I say this. Okay. I did 7 retreats with this teacher and quite a few video sessions, one-on-one with him. So in some ways he was like my therapist, certainly my mentor, and a teacher, spiritual teacher to many. And I'm really enjoying this particular kind of grief because it's just getting me in touch with so much gratitude, like you mentioned.
Well, and there's a lot of gratitude in the comments, Rachel. Yeah. Many people are saying that they're incredibly sorry for your loss, but so appreciative of your honesty and your vulnerability. Some have spoken. Emily says, I still grieve for the childhood I never had. Thank you for helping make things a little clearer. Yeah. Helps me understand my BPD. as bipolar disorder. Is that right?
Probably borderline personality disorder,
Borderline
which is almost always as a consequence of childhood grief and trauma.
There is some comments. I feel our culture, Sarah says, puts an unspoken time limit on grief. Sending you love, Dr. Rachel.
That's very true, Sarah. You know, a lot of the clients will come into my office and say, well, why am I still sad about this when X amount of time has passed? And the unconscious mind does not work on, 24-hour time. There is no, our bodies can hold on to grief, like store it for a much later date if we're not able to work through it at the time. There's no time limit.
Mia reminds us that the lump in the throat also restricts our communication, not only the digestion, but our ability to verbalize our feelings. Jo says, she mentions Brene Brown and vulnerability. If we're emotionally shut down, we're closing ourselves to everything, as we were talking about, the gratitude and the grief, they go hand in hand. If the more I can expand my capacity for grief, the more I can expand my capacity for gratitude or joy.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments. There's a few stories in here. And a lot of support for you. Which makes sense. And it's a reminder that even though grief feels very lonely, it's a universal experience, and we do share that. It certainly seems to lighten the load.
It does. And it's interesting, and I really appreciate people's sympathies and condolences very much. And, it's tricky in our culture to communicate other forms of grief other than possibly when somebody you love has died, or when you've had a breakup, maybe when you've had a job loss. There's very limited sort of scenarios where our culture says, I understand that you would be in grief or that you would be sad. And of course, these situations are truly grief-inducing and absolutely valid. But then there's all this other grief people have spoken about, like the grief of lost aspects of our childhood. This is stuff that is really difficult for most of us to have send our condolences. Not that people need condolences for that sort of stuff, but that's the complex trauma and the complex grief, and yet there's some similarities here. There's a sense of something that's precious in me, a precious need that is now absent, or has been or was absent in our outer experience of life. And being able to compassionately embrace this, that this thing is very alive and precious in me, but it's not out there anymore. And maybe it never was, as in the case of, the childhood you didn't get to have. And yet somehow still allowing the intensity. Grief is so intense. And being with it, and it can help to have this is where, having a really good listening buddy, a mentor, as I had in Robert, and a good therapist to help to have a witness. It's hard to be with your own intensity. So having a supportive witness is really supportive in my experience. This is why we must be careful who we spend our time with as well, in my view.
My understanding of the deeper value of that is that it can be a corrective experience for those times when we were grieving as children, or when our needs weren't met, and our parents, for whatever reason, or our caregivers, for whatever reason, were not able to be present with that. And that having someone, a dear friend, someone that you trust, a therapist, to be present and to together expand capacity for grief can be corrective of even that childhood memory or that childhood discomfort. It's my experience.
Exactly. We can find, loving mothers and fathers in all sorts of places, right? Including nature, other people. Yeah.
poetry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
there's a question that's coming to my mind, Rachel, and that is, as you were speaking earlier, you reminded me for the fact that there is difficulty with our own grief, or culturally there's difficulty with grief. It's often hard to know what to say to someone who's grieving.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you might be willing to share a little bit about your needs at the moment, and what those of us who care and support you, what we can provide in terms of words or support. Yeah, what could we say? What would you like from us?
Oh, that is such a beautiful question and request. A couple of things come to my mind. It's first of all just being able to voice, just to say something about my beloved teacher, and I'll maybe post some links after this in the comments below, so that if anybody's interested in the work of Robert Gonzalez, my teacher who just passed away, you could look into his work, because that would mean a lot to me, just the honoring and the sharing of his amazing work, body of work. This morning when I learned of his passing, my husband said, "Come here," and he gave me a very big and long, deep hug. And that physical touch was really met my need for being seen and for comfort. Then I spoke with a friend on the phone for about half an hour who also had this mentor in his life, and we, cried and laughed. And again, it's that witnessing and that human connection, and the shared experience, the sharing. I mean, I think that's a need, is just to share things with you. And I went to the beach last week. It was beautiful. Just the shared experience with another human is such a precious need. And it's also, grief is when we can really, really go into our grief. I think it just naturally puts us in touch with our need to love and care and appreciate and value that which is supportive of us. And so hence why I'm grateful for this pain I'm feeling today, because I'm remembering the deep value in my mentor's efforts and his generosity, the enormous value. Like, I couldn't be the therapist I am today without having been under his tutelage. And so that's, I hope that answers your question. They are all the needs that are alive in me at the moment.
Yes, I love the description of the deep hug that your husband gave you. There is a quality to the hug, and the sharing with someone who is in a similar experience. I agree. I think that's what we would have done. I had a conversation with someone recently who came from a small village in Africa, and he said that when they grieve, they properly grieve. They come together and they just make sound and they use their bodies, and that the sharing of that and the acceptance of that, I think, must offer a tremendous relief that we don't have in our culture.
It makes me think of the Jewish women with their wailing wall.
Yes.
If they lost a child or a sister or husband or whoever, they would together go to the wall, and they could sort of lean against the wall, and together they could vocalize their grief.
Right, and some support there, even that contact and that grounding, even. And the sharing, to know that it's a human experience to feel grief, to even see someone else grieving, gives me permission to allow that experience.
It certainly does, which is why I wanted to do this topic today, because all of us will come up against grief.
I will.
Every single human being. And today is that time for me as a therapist. It doesn't matter whether you're a therapist, psychologist, yoga teacher, or a garbage collector, whoever you are, you've you're going to come up against grief multiple times. And then when you do, you have two choices, really. You either suppress it or muffle it, or you allow it and go right into it and let it teach you what it wants to teach you. And this is teaching again, this is teaching me about deepening and softening. And someone's made a comment, I think it's Lisa, today's the first time I've made the connection between my trauma and grief. I felt like what I was feeling couldn't possibly be grief because it wasn't culturally accepted grief. And so it's I can't even remember, I don't even know why I'm sorry, I can't speak now. I've lost my train of thought.
You're doing beautifully. So there was a comment that triggered your response, Rach.
Yeah.
I'm having a look through. Oh yes, Lisa Renee says, today is the first time I've made the connection between my trauma and grief. I felt like what I was feeling couldn't be grief because it wasn't traditional, culturally accepted grief.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have so many thoughts that I'd love to share about grief sitting with clients over the years, and none of them are coming to my mind. So
yeah, and nor should they right now. This is time for you to be in it. I love that you have honored Robert Gonzalez through sharing your experience of grief in a way that he would have wanted. You're using NVC by acknowledging your feelings and acknowledging your needs and making requests. It's actually couldn't be more perfect.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a nice summary. And yeah, I was talking about the choice we have once we encounter grief in some form or another. We have a choice to let it grow bigger or smaller, in a sense. You know, and I'd like to just share one clinical, it's sort of a sort of a prototype story, because this has happened in many ways in my office over the years. And you may have had this when you've taught people just to breathe, but underneath their anxiety or their depression, sometimes people discover a whole bunch of grief, deep grief. And it, because they haven't had a safe container before in which to feel it, or perhaps they come to therapy with grief, a particular grief for a loss of a pet or a colleague or something, and then they discover it's sort of opened the floodgates, and then they discover, now that I'm in it, now that I've softened, now that something's opened, all this other stuff is coming through. And this surprises some people. Of course, it doesn't surprise me anymore, ever, because this is how it works, both on a physiological level and a psychological level. And that's where we get the choice, or sometimes we don't have a choice, we've just got to live through it. But, you know, we could go back to old patterns of suppressing and avoiding and denying, or we could go on the journey to live through the various processes and experiences of the grief. And it may take days, weeks, months, or years, and we can't put a time frame around it. Our feelings will tell us when we're done.
Yes, you're reminding me that if grief remains unresolved, that it does reside in the body in the form of deep holding, a deep tension. And wherever there's deep tension, there's a lack of circulation. And wherever there's a lack of circulation, we don't get clearance and we don't get nutrition. So the tissues, it's called necrosis, you know, if they're not nourished, they start to wither. So we do need to grieve, and even if you are surrounded by a family who doesn't, you know, grieve traditionally, perhaps you can find even one friend or one therapist who has done their grief work and who can hold that space for you. And I'm glad you mentioned yoga, because yoga does offer plenty of recognition, and perhaps it's because it originates in the East, where there's a lot more day-to-day exposure to death. As you would know, Shavasana, the final pose, is the direct practice of our own dying, our own letting go. And the sighing that's often encouraged in yoga is a similar release. and a practice for that final exhale. Grief is a letting go. As you described, that opening of the floodgates and the washing outward. There is a release that happens through grief.
And it's so important to have an understanding of this and have support for this, and always and an honoring of our own protective structures or defense mechanisms that may sort of chafe up against this and push back sometimes. And that's okay too. You know, we might find that we come to a practice group like the one we run, you know, someone might come with the intention of opening up a little more to themselves and others and being vulnerable, and then they may experience something reflexively sort of tightening again, and that's the survival mind. That's okay too. Like, let's never shame yourself for struggling with this, because we must honor everything, honor the deepest feelings, honor grief, honor the defenses that try and protect us from fear and vulnerability, and yet persist. Keep going. Need a commitment to this work, because it is so vulnerability inducing. It's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy.
So I'm wondering, in wrapping up our conversation today, whether we might just offer something for people to take away with them, because this conversation may have brought up your own grief. I know when I'm in the presence of those who are feeling, it brings up my unfelt feeling.
Yeah.
And so chances are that there will be some opening if you have been in on today's conversation. And we invite you to remain open and soft. And that's the beauty of a Sunday evening. Provide a safe container for yourself. That may be energetically, it may be geographically, it may be with the people that you are with. And I know that you and I are both big advocates of getting pen to paper to, to pour out. Go on, yes.
Yeah, so if I think it's a nice, let me offer a practice that people could try.
Please.
After they get off this, after they shut down Facebook.
Yeah.
And it's a journaling exercise, but you could take this to your therapist or to a friend if you trust somebody enough to hold space for you. It's 4 questions that you journal about. The first one is, what stories am I telling myself? I'll put these in the comments, but if you want to write them down as well. Yeah. What stories am I telling myself? For example, this morning when I burst into tears, there was a little voice, not very loud, but a little voice that said something like, I can't remember exactly, this is a bit silly. Why are you feeling so sad? And that voice didn't hang around for very long, but often we have shame around grief and around even crying, like I mentioned in the article posted earlier today. So you may be telling yourself a bunch of stories about your own feelings. Write them down. They're very likely presenting a barrier to your true and full grieving. The second question is, what am I feeling emotionally and bodily? So, and or bodily. So it's sometimes my experience that people will say, I'm feeling sadness, I'm feeling gratitude. Other people might use language that's more bodily. I'm feeling tight, I'm feeling jittery, or something like that. So the second question is, what am I feeling emotionally and physically? Just focus on that level of experience. The third question is, what am I longing for? Underneath this feeling, somewhere in this feeling, I am needing something, or I am really deeply valuing some qualities of life, of my existence. What are they? And this is where pulling out a needs list, which we could also post in the comments, can be very helpful. It's the question you asked me before, Alexis, what are you needing? What would support you? And the final 4th question, which is optional, it's optional, but it's, what do I request now of myself or others? do I have any requests of myself to look after myself? Or do I have any requests of other people? Could I ask something of someone else? So if you go through these 4 questions as a journaling exercise and then see what happens.
Yeah. I love that that you've landed there in a request, because extending ourselves to others when we have strong feelings takes a lot of courage, and it's not always met, but when it is met, it always lightens the load. And grief is certainly one to share and to shift that culture around avoiding grief and starting to share it. I'm really so pleased that you shared it with us today, Rachel. And from the comments, it seems that the community is really, really valuing it also.
Me too. And I'd just like to say one more thing. You don't necessarily need to choose a situation around which you have grief. You could also choose anger, because guess what? Under your anger, there's probably some grief. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rachel. Always such a valuable conversation. Was there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
No, just if you could tell people about our upcoming events, that would be terrific.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we have a monthly practice group that's open to all of you. It is an in-person group at this stage. So I guess it's open to all of you in Brisbane, or those of you who are willing to travel, but it's once a month on the last Sunday of the month. So this coming Sunday, so a week from today, will be our final practice group for the year. And that's when we get together and we practice these 4 steps that Rachel has described. Non-violent communication, which Robert Gonzalez is a teacher, or was a teacher of, and as is Marshall Rosenberg, if you'd like to look up his work. And then our final workshop for the year is the spirituality of non-violent communication. And that one will be on the 12th of December. Again, it's a Sunday morning. It's a 4-hour workshop, that one. And you can find out details on my website, onenaturaltherapies.com.au. And is that one also on your website, Rachel, North Brisbane Psychologists?
Yeah, it absolutely is. So yeah, if you're in Southeast Queensland, we'd love to see you at one of them. Now, there's a few more comments we didn't get to, so I'm going to spend some time this evening briefly answering a few other questions in the comments and posting some of the links that I mentioned as well.
That sounds stunning. I look forward to picking those up later this evening. I have a family dinner to get to.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we'll be here same time, same place. Live fun.
Okay. Thanks, Alexis. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.